August 1944. The Allied offensive at Normandy has overwhelmed German resistance throughout France. General George Patton's Third Army is surging eastward at an unprecedented pace, covering 30, 40, sometimes 50 miles daily, a speed that defied all military planning. However, an unforeseen challenge emerged. The armies were outstripping their logistical support. Each Sherman tank consumed 5 gallons of fuel per mile, and every infantry division required 650 tons of provisions daily, encompassing ammunition, rations, medical supplies, and spare parts. The port of Cherbourg, still under repair from extensive German sabotage, could only handle a minuscule fraction of the needed tonnage. The subsequent major port, Antwerp, would remain non-operational for months. Consequently, every single item, from bullets to bandages to canned beans, had to be transported overland from the Normandy beaches, a distance of 350 miles to the front lines, traversing roads heavily damaged by the retreating Germans. At Supreme Allied Headquarters, logistics officers grappled with impossible arithmetic. Patton's tanks were literally running on fumes. The Third Army's rapid advance had left supply convoys struggling to keep pace. Within a single week, forward units reported having only 3 days' worth of ammunition remaining. Some tank battalions found themselves completely immobilized, not by enemy fire, but by empty fuel tanks. The tension in the room was palpable when Colonel Frank Ross, Chief of Transportation, briefed General Eisenhower on August 21st. "We are losing 23% of our supplies before they reach the front lines," Ross reported, citing truck accidents, German aerial assaults, and vehicle breakdowns during convoys. The dilemma was stark. Halting Patton's advance would allow the Germans to regroup, while continuing without adequate supplies would lead to the collapse of his army. Eisenhower surveyed the map, acutely aware that the opportunity to conclude the war by Christmas was dwindling. When asked about the time needed to rectify the situation, the response was grim. Weeks, perhaps months, requiring a complete overhaul of the convoy system and the establishment of proper maintenance depots. "We don't have weeks," Eisenhower stated, his finger tracing the red line indicating the German border. "The Wehrmacht is in retreat now. If we grant them time to regroup, we'll be facing the Siegfried Line in winter." He addressed the room. "I need solutions in days, gentlemen, not months." The meeting adjourned without answers. On that same day, 90 miles from headquarters, Technical Sergeant Raymond Kowalski sat in the cab of his GMC Jimmy truck, gazing at the devastation of another convoy. 8 trucks lay overturned and burned, their cargo strewn across the roadside. A Luftwaffe strafing run had caught them clustered on a narrow road, effectively turning them into sitting ducks. Kowalski, 34 years old, had been a long-haul trucker in Pittsburgh before the war. Lacking a college degree or military background, he possessed 15 years of experience hauling steel shipments across Pennsylvania's challenging mountain roads in all seasons and conditions. Drafted in 1943, he received 2 weeks of driver training before being sent to France. Now, he witnessed brave men perish because the command staff failed to grasp the practicalities of truck operations. Lighting a cigarette, he recalled a saying from his dispatcher in Pittsburgh: "Convoys are for show, profits are in the spacing." Before we continue, if you're fascinated by the untold innovations that changed history, hit that subscribe button. 75% of you watching aren't subscribed yet, and you're missing stories like this every week. The official convoy doctrine for the Red Ball Express, the code name for this urgent supply operation, was straightforward. Trucks were to travel together in formations of 20 or more vehicles, spaced 60 yards apart, at a maximum speed of 25 miles per hour, emphasizing safety in numbers. Kowalski had driven 6 convoys in the preceding 2 weeks, and each had sustained casualties. The primary issue wasn't just the deadly German air attacks. It was the inherent vulnerability created before any attack even occurred. 20 trucks crammed together on a rural French road presented a target visible for 10 miles. When the lead vehicle detected enemy aircraft, the entire convoy would halt, rendering maneuver impossible. Trucks ahead were trapped by those behind. The spacing intended for safety ironically created a perfect kill zone. However, Kowalski observed something else. On August 23rd, his convoy was delayed at a depot for 6 hours. Some trucks were loaded faster than others, and a few impatient drivers departed independently once their cargo was secured, without coordination or official orders. These individual drivers reached the Ford supply dump without incident, each arriving safely. Later, Kowalski's own convoy, adhering to the official doctrine, lost 3 trucks to a German FW-90 attack. He began to discern a pattern. Independent trucks, traveling alone or in pairs, spread out over hours, were nearly impossible for German aircraft to target effectively. A Luftwaffe strike on a single vehicle was deemed an inefficient use of fuel and ammunition. A convoy, however, was a high-value target. The arithmetic was simple. 20 trucks in a convoy constituted 1 target. 20 individual trucks dispersed over 4 hours of travel time represented 20 separate hunting opportunities. The Germans possessed finite aircraft, fuel, and pilots. Kowalski meticulously recorded his findings in a notebook. Convoys averaged 23% losses due to accidents, attacks, and breakdowns. In contrast, the handful of independent trucks he had tracked experienced less than 3% losses. On August 25th, he presented his findings to his company commander, Captain Dennis Hayes. "Sir," Kowalski declared, "I believe I've discovered a way to reduce our supply losses by 90%. Hayes, looking at the dusty, oil-stained truck driver standing in his tent, uttered words that would resonate through military logistics for the next 80 years. "Kowalski, you're a goddamn truck driver. Leave the tactics to the West Point graduates." The official Army rejection arrived in writing. Captain Hayes forwarded Kowalski's proposal up the chain of command with a curt note. "Enlisted man suggests abandoning convoy doctrine. Recommend dismissal." The response from battalion headquarters was swift. "Convoy procedures are based on established military doctrine. Individual vehicle operations create communication gaps, eliminate mutual support, and violate tactical protocol. Proposal denied." Kowalski read the memo, a bitter laugh escaping him. Tactical protocol? He had been driving trucks since these staff officers were in high school, and they were lecturing him on vehicle operations. Yet he persisted. On August 27th, he approached Lieutenant Colonel Martin Burgess, the Deputy Operations Officer for the Transportation Corps. Burgess listened for 10 minutes before shaking his head. "Ray, I understand your logic, but do you know what happens if I send trucks out individually and one breaks down? No escort, no support. The driver's stranded in hostile territory." Burgess tapped the map. "These roads are still crawling with bypassed German units. Convoy security isn't just about air attacks." "Sir," Kowalski replied respectfully, "we're losing a quarter of our supplies in convoys that are supposed to be safe. I'll take my chances alone." "It's not just your chances, Kowalski, it's Army property. It's strategic material." Burgess's tone softened. "Look, I appreciate the initiative, I really do, but this isn't a peacetime trucking company. This is military operations. There are reasons we do things a certain way." The room erupted when Kowalski attempted to present his data at a driver's briefing on August 28th. Other sergeants shouted him down. "Are you trying to get us all killed separately instead of together?" one demanded. "At least in a convoy we've got support." Even his fellow drivers considered him deluded. The unofficial word spread through the motor pools. Kowalski had a death wish, wanting to play cowboy on French roads while Luftwaffe fighters were actively hunting. His own squad ceased socializing with him at mess, but 3 individuals paid attention. Private First Class James Booker, a driver from Detroit's automotive factories, approached Kowalski privately. "I've been observing the same thing you have," Booker confided. "The independent runs are safer." "Everyone knows it, they just won't admit it." 2 other drivers, Corporal Eddie Martinez and Private Willie Jackson, quietly informed Kowalski they would volunteer for his method if it were ever approved. It seemed unlikely. On August 29th, Colonel Ross personally reviewed the proposal and scrawled across the top, "Denied. Unauthorized deviation from convoy protocol is prohibited. Any driver operating outside established convoy parameters will face court-martial." The official army had spoken. Raymond Kowalski's unconventional idea was effectively dead. However, someone else had been reviewing the reports. Lieutenant General Walter Bedell Smith, Eisenhower's chief of staff, was experiencing sleepless nights in late August 1944. The supply crisis was escalating to catastrophic levels. Patton had been ordered to halt his advance not by the Germans but by depleted fuel reserves. The British 21st Army Group was rationing ammunition. The window to capitalize on the German collapse was rapidly closing. Smith was the kind of officer who read everything, including after-action reports from truck companies, casualty statistics from the Red Ball Express, and even a proposal from some sergeant in Pennsylvania that everyone else had dismissed as lunacy. On August 30th, Smith entered Colonel Ross's office unannounced. "This truck driver, Kowalski," Smith began, "his proposal regarding individual dispatch, why was it rejected?" Ross was caught off guard. "Sir, it violates fundamental convoy doctrine. The vehicles would be—" "I've read the doctrine," Smith interrupted. "I'm asking why we are losing a quarter of our supplies while following it." "Well, sir, the casualties are within expected parameters for—" Smith's voice, sharp enough to cut steel, interjected. "Expected parameters? General Patton's entire army is immobilized because we are accepting expected parameters. Get me this sergeant, now." 2 hours later, Raymond Kowalski stood in a headquarters tent, facing 3 full colonels and a lieutenant general. He wore coveralls still redolent of diesel fuel, hadn't shaved in 2 days, and was convinced his military career was about to end. Smith wasted no time. "Sergeant, explain your method. Assume I know nothing about trucking." Kowalski took a deep breath. "Sir, the Germans cannot attack what they cannot predict. Right now, we dispatch 20 truck convoys at scheduled intervals. The Luftwaffe knows our departure times, our routes, our speeds. They simply station fighters along the route and wait." He withdrew his worn notebook. "But if we load trucks as quickly as they arrive at the depot, without waiting for convoy assembly, and send them out immediately at staggered intervals, the Germans never know when or where to intercept. Instead of 20 trucks bunched within a quarter mile, you have 20 trucks spread across 60 miles of road over 3 hours." "What about breakdowns?" Colonel Ross interjected. "What about enemy ground forces?" Kowalski responded, "The same solution as now. We still employ escort jeeps on patrol routes, but one broken-down truck doesn't halt 19 others. And a bypassed German unit might ambush 1 truck. In a convoy, they'd ambush 20. The room fell silent. Smith studied the figures Kowalski had meticulously recorded. Conventional convoys, 23% losses. Independent trucks, 3% losses. "Anecdotal evidence from a handful of trucks is not enough," Ross argued. "We need to test it." Smith's decision was immediate. "Sergeant Kowalski, you will conduct a trial operation. 1 week, 20 trucks under your dispatch method. If losses drop below 10%, we will implement it system-wide." Ross's face flushed crimson. "Sir, if this fails, I will take responsibility. But if it works and we didn't try it, that failure is mine too." Smith looked at Kowalski. "You've got your chance, Sergeant. Don't waste it." September 1st, 1944. Kowalski stood at the Allenson Supply Depot, observing 20 trucks arrive for loading. This was his test, his singular opportunity. If it failed, men would die, and he would spend the remainder of the war in the stockade. If it succeeded, he might save thousands of lives. The traditional convoy method would proceed as follows. All 20 trucks would wait until every vehicle was loaded, typically 4 to 6 hours. Then they would depart together in formation, 60 yards apart, traveling at 25 miles per hour. Travel time to forward dumps averaged 14 hours. The total time from arrival to delivery would be approximately 20 hours. Kowalski's method was radically different. The first truck finished loading at 600 hours. He did not wait. "You're gone," he instructed the driver. "Route 7, standard speed, independent operation." The driver, appearing nervous, nodded and rolled out immediately. The second truck finished at 618 hours. "Go." The third truck at 633 hours. "Go." Instead of a single convoy departing at noon, Kowalski dispatched 20 trucks between 600 and 1100 hours, a 5-hour window of staggered departures. At any given moment, they were spread across 90 miles of road, traveling at optimal speeds for the prevailing conditions rather than adhering to fixed formations. He also altered the speeds. Rather than the mandatory 25-mile-per-hour convoy crawl, he advised experienced drivers, "Run what's safe. You know these roads now. If you can do 40, do 40. If it's 30, it's 30." The Transportation Corps observers were aghast. Colonel Ross's deputy meticulously noted violations: exceeding speed limits, lack of convoy organization, individual vehicle operations in a combat zone. Yet, something remarkable occurred. The trucks began arriving at forward supply dumps faster than any convoy had ever managed. The first vehicle reached the 3rd Army Depot at 1830 hours, 12.5 hours after departure, 90 minutes faster than the convoy average. The last truck arrived at 2245 hours the following morning. All 20 trucks delivered their cargo. There were 0 losses, 0 attacks, and 1 minor breakdown, a flat tire that the driver changed himself and continued without delaying anyone else. The German Luftwaffe did spot 3 of Kowalski's trucks during the run, but intercepting a single vehicle required a fighter to divert from patrol, hunt down 1 target, and expend ammunition for minimal payoff. 2 pilots did not bother. The third made a single strafing pass, missed, and returned to base rather than wasting fuel on pursuit. On the second day, another 20 trucks were dispatched, resulting in 19 successful deliveries and 1 accident. A driver fell asleep and crashed. However, this was a single vehicle loss, not a multi-truck pileup as occurred in convoy accidents. The loss rate was 5%. On the third day, 22 trucks completed 22 deliveries with 0 losses. By the 5th day, even the skeptical colonels were observing the statistics with disbelief. Kowalski's unorthodox method was reducing supply losses from 23% to less than 3%, a 90% reduction, and trucks were transporting cargo faster than anyone had thought possible. On September 7th, General Smith issued the order: all Red Ball Express operations will immediately adopt staggered individual dispatch protocols as developed by Technical Sergeant Raymond Kowalski. The transformation occurred almost overnight. By mid-September, the entire Red Ball Express, comprising nearly 6,000 trucks, had abandoned traditional convoy operations. Depots loaded and dispatched vehicles continuously around the clock. Trucks departed every 3 to 5 minutes, rather than massing into vulnerable formations. The statistics were staggering. In the final 8 weeks of Red Ball Express operations, from September through November 1944, supply losses dropped to 2.7%. Delivery speed increased by 32%. The quantity of supplies reaching Patton's Third Army and other frontline units more than doubled. German after-action reports captured their frustration. A Luftwaffe squadron commander wrote in October, "Allied supply trucks now operate with no predictable pattern. Individual vehicle interdiction is an ineffective use of limited air resources. Recommend focusing fighter operations on tactical ground support rather than logistics harassment." The Americans had rendered truck hunting economically unviable for the overextended Luftwaffe. For every German fighter sent to intercept scattered trucks, 1 less aircraft was available to defend against Allied bombers or support ground troops. The Germans simply could not afford the trade-off. But the impact extended beyond mere statistics. The Red Ball Express, now operating under Kowalski's staggered dispatch method, delivered 412,193 tons of supplies in 82 days of operation. This was sufficient ammunition, fuel, and equipment to sustain 6 Allied armies advancing across France and into Germany. Patton's Third Army alone received enough fuel to drive from Normandy to the German border. Historians would later debate whether Allied logistics or combat prowess secured victory in Europe. The answer, of course, was both. But it was logistics that made combat possible, and Kowalski's method made logistics sustainable. The system's success spread beyond the Red Ball Express. By November, trucking operations across all Allied theaters were adopting staggered dispatch. The British Eighth Army in Italy tested the method and reported similar positive outcomes. Even Pacific Theater logistics planners began studying the approach for their island-hopping operations. In late October, a captured German staff officer near Aachen was interrogated about Allied supply operations. When asked about Allied trucking, he shook his head in exasperation. "We cannot target what we cannot predict," he stated through a translator. "Your trucks are like ghosts now, everywhere and nowhere. We stopped even trying to intercept them. It's a waste of fuel we don't have." That quote found its way into intelligence summaries and eventually reached Eisenhower's desk. The Supreme Commander circled the remark and wrote a note to Smith. "This sergeant's method is forcing the Germans to concede the logistics battle. Recommend formal recognition." On November 18, 1944, 2 days after the Red Ball Express officially concluded its operations, Technical Sergeant Raymond Kowalski received the Bronze Star Medal for exceptional meritorious service in support of combat operations. The citation specifically commended his innovative tactical logistics methods, which significantly reduced supply losses and enhanced operational effectiveness. Raymond Kowalski returned to Pittsburgh in 1946. He resumed his pre-war profession, driving trucks. There were no book deals, no speaking tours, just a Bronze Star medal tucked away in a drawer and the memories of a few weeks in France when his improbable idea had actually succeeded. However, the military did not forget. The U.S. Army Transportation Corps formally adopted staggered dispatch protocols as official doctrine in 1947. The method became a mandatory part of the curriculum at Fort Lee, Virginia, the transportation school, where every logistics officer learned about the Pittsburgh truck driver who revolutionized convoy theory. During the Korean War, the Berlin Airlift, Vietnam, Desert Storm, Iraq, and Afghanistan, American logistics operations employed variations of Kowalski's method. Modern military supply convoys no longer mass into large vulnerable formations. Instead, they operate with dispersed timing, varied routes, and unpredictable patterns. The principle has evolved with technological advancements. Today's military trucks are equipped with GPS tracking, satellite communication, and encrypted coordination systems. But the core concept, making enemy interdiction efforts economically inefficient by dispersing the logistics footprint, remains precisely what Kowalski deduced in his notebook while witnessing convoys burn. Civilian trucking also benefited from this insight. The modern logistics industry's just-in-time delivery systems, staggered scheduling, and distributed warehouse networks all trace their intellectual lineage back to the same fundamental understanding. Bunching creates vulnerability, spacing creates resilience. Companies like Amazon, FedEx, and UPS dispatch vehicles continuously throughout the day rather than in scheduled waves. This approach is more efficient, harder to disrupt, and scales better. They likely do not realize they are employing a method pioneered by a truck driver during World War II, but they are. In 2003, the U.S. Army Transportation Museum at Fort Lee opened an exhibit dedicated to the Red Ball Express. A section of this exhibit features Raymond Kowalski. His notebook, in which he meticulously tracked convoy losses and performed his calculations, is displayed in a case. Adjacent to it is a photograph of him standing beside his GMC Jimmy truck, cigarette in hand, appearing exactly as he was, a working-class driver who understood his profession far better than the so-called experts. A sign proclaimed, The most impactful advancements often originate not from the strategists or the thinkers, but from the individuals actively engaged in the work. Kowalski passed away in 1983 at the age of 73. His death notice in Pittsburgh's Post-Gazette noted his Bronze Star but offered no details on how he merited the decoration. He was simply a former truck driver, a combatant, a reserved individual who had fulfilled his duty. However, in every contemporary military logistics curriculum, in every academic paper on World War II's supply chains, in every examination of how the Allied forces maintained their momentum across Europe, a reference exists to the non-commissioned officer who demonstrated that sometimes the most outlandish concept is simply an unacknowledged reality. His approach not only reduced supply wastage by 90%, but fundamentally altered how the contemporary world transports all goods, from armaments to everyday merchandise. Its application persists to this day, continuing to preserve lives and rendering the adversary's efforts financially unviable. This remarkable legacy stems from a single truck driver hailing from Pittsburgh who declined to accept that convoys represented the sole feasible method of operation.